For sure. And David, we're not even saying, hey, employee that's been working for a decade, you're relying on the current way the system is structured. We're not saying move them off of the current structure. We're just saying go forward, allow people to have this new type of retirement account that's the gold standard in the private sector.
Is there any ballpark as to how much we could save taxpayers if we moved in that direction?
So our friends at the Heritage Foundation estimate that this would save $237 billion if we were to move to this type of a retirement benefit for future employees.
Yeah, so that's not even touching the promises that have already been made to current employees.
That's correct. That is correct. So significant savings just by changing what happens going forward.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Frum. Today's episode is another in our Big Ideas for Smaller Government series. And the idea is to talk about spending cuts that can be made in government departments to reach our goal of cutting $2 trillion. Today, we're talking about the Office of Personnel Management, basically the HR department for the federal government. And like always, we start these episodes out by explaining how we got the department. Now, back in the 19th century, getting a federal job was all about who you knew, not what you knew. That changed after President James Garfield was assassinated by someone angry over not getting a government job. In response, the Pendleton Act of 1883 introduced merit-based hiring and created the U.S. Civil Service Commission. Then, the Classification Act of 1923 cleaned up the chaotic pay system and pushed for equal pay for equal work, which really was pretty bold for its time. The big shift came with the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. President Carter's reforms split the overloaded Civil Service Commission into three parts: the new Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, the Merit Systems Protection Board, and the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So, now that you know about OPM, let's get to the topic with our guest, Jeremiah Mosteller, who is the Policy Director for Americans for Prosperity. Welcome back, Jeremiah.
David, so excited to be here again with you. And I'm so excited about this one that I had to start standing up. I could not sit down for this one. Maybe I've had a little too much coffee this morning.
Yeah, you're over at the whiteboard already. So let's get going and talking about the Office of Personnel Management.
Yeah. Well, David, like you said, OPM is essentially the HR department of the federal government, but it does a lot within that, what sounds like a very simple explanation. So, I mean, there are essentially $330 billion spent by OPM every single year. And it has around 16 offices and 6 different specific divisions that encompass this agency, which is essentially a sub-agency of another agency. And to kind of break it down really easy, there's kind of 6 main components or divisions. You have the workforce, policy, and innovation program, which is helping essentially every other agency comply with this very complex regime of statutory and regulatory requirements that apply to federal employment. Like you said, this agency has been kind of bounced around and split and divided and mixed around. And so that has just created a lot of loopholes for other agencies to run through. So they're essentially advising other agencies on how to do that. This is one of those we've talked about Russian nesting dolls of agencies regulating other agencies, and this is another example of that. But you also have the retirement services section or division, which pretty straightforward. It provides the retirement benefits to 2.8 million former federal employees. That's a pretty straightforward component. You also have the healthcare and insurance division, which provides healthcare, life insurance, other benefits to current existing federal employees. You also have the merit system, which you already referenced in your opening, which is really, hey, we're going to figure out how to apply the merit and civil service laws to all these different agencies that do a variety of different things. So they, similar to WPI, they advise other agencies on how to apply those laws. You have HR Solutions, which is essentially the basic HR component of OPM. So it's your typical recruitment, performance management, promoting employees, those types of parts of HR. And then last but not least, you have the Suitability Programs Office, which essentially does character and conduct assessments of employees to determine whether they should stay employed, get a promotion, get a job in the first place. And so they help advise other agencies on those types of things whenever they're recruiting or promoting employees.
So they're doing a lot of stuff and spending a lot of money. But OPM made the news recently, probably in the last few months, because of a limestone mine in Pennsylvania, which seems pretty random. So how are the two connected?
Yeah. So David, this is an old mine in Pennsylvania. They essentially have had to find a place decades and decades ago to keep all of the thousands and millions of pieces of paper that they had to use back in the day to process retirements. Well, guess what? That process has not changed. And so they had to find something as massive as a large mine to host those 26,000 filing cabinets that keep all of the paper files of federal employees. And they have 600 of their employees that work in this mine to manually process on paper files the retirements of federal employees.
I mean, that's incredible. It seems like a joke. I mean, really, that's unbelievable in this day and age. I mean, it could at least be on like an old 1990s computer or something. But I mean, everybody's paperwork is still processed via paper in a mine in Pennsylvania. If you work for the federal government, that's unbelievable.
It takes 66 days to process a federal retirement, which for comparison, most private companies or nonprofits or other entities can process them in a couple days. And so it just shows you how this process is holding back the federal government.
Yeah. I don't know how they can be using such an archaic system. It's just unbelievable. Yeah. Well, I actually did see an episode on the news once, an interview specifically about the limestone mine that OPM is using. And it was from the angle of DOJ, talking about it and how they encountered it and their shock, the staff members on DOJ. So how is DOJ helping to reduce the costs of processing paperwork?
Yeah, well, OPM has tried a couple of times, and by a couple, I mean closer to 10 times, to digitize this process. So it's the same process they've been using for 65 years. So in 2008, for the first time ever, so a lot, not far from here, but a long time from 65 years ago, they said, well, we should digitize this. And so they tried. They spent millions of dollars, spent years trying to do it, and failed. They've tried a couple more times to do it. They then announced in January that they were going to try again to do it and try, I guess, spend a couple more $1 million to do this. And every single time they've just essentially failed. It's taken a long time. They spent a lot of money to try and digitize this process. Well, surprise, surprise, you bring in some private sector individuals who have experience in computer systems and technology, and they've already been able to move this process forward. They've already been able to process the first retirement digitally, and they were able to do it in 2 days compared to 66 days.
Oh, wow. That's pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
I'm always struck as we talk about these agencies. There's just some themes that are so frustrating, but almost reinforcing of just mental models I've had in the past, which is, there are real efficiencies that can be found. Yeah, there's a lot of money being wasted, and we don't even have to always cut things. We don't really have to cut things that are, most Americans think are semi-essential. There's so many efficiencies and so much money to be saved by just doing things better. It's unbelievable. So in a way, it's an encouraging message, because I think there is a pathway, at least initially, to save a lot of taxpayer money. Now, not to say, our spending is perfect, and there's a lot of serious changes that need to be made. But so while OPM is being updated, and, hopefully that'll save taxpayers a fair amount of money, there are a few employees that OPM is spending a little over $166,000 a year on each. And that's a lot more than the average salary for Americans. What are they spending that money on?
Well, David, in February, I think some of your listeners may have heard there has been a big push by the Trump administration to get federal workers back in the office. And so OPM told employees in February that they had to return to office. And they specifically were targeting employees who were more than 50 miles away from the office that they would work in, to tell them, hey, you're going to have to move because we need you in the office. And so they told the employees this. The employees said, okay, good to know. 20% lived more than 50 miles away. And 250 of that 20% came back to OPM and said, hey, I either can't afford or I am not going to move without assistance. And so OPM has been gracious enough to say, well, we'll provide relocation assistance to those employees. And that's transportation cost, housing cost, moving cost, any of those things that typically, are provided for relocation assistance, but also a few other things like, hey, if you are subject to any additional taxes, we will reimburse you for those because of your move. And so they're helping these people move and they're having to provide that money. And they have until September 30th to complete those moves. And we know that all of this actually from the Federal News Network, which found the documents, did a FOIA request and got emails and records and all of that to actually discover that this is happening. It's a pretty high cost per employee. Like you said, nearly $170,000 per employee. Now, every employee is not using that amount, but the total that they're going to spend broken out by those 251 employees comes out to nearly $170,000.
I'm a supervisor. We deal sometimes with relocations and different costs for employees that we really want to bring on board or put into a new role. And it isn't even sniffing that much money. That's a lot of money. So, well, what other cuts can be made at OPM?
Yeah, David. Well, we have a pretty simple one today that we can talk about. And it is essentially to move recent and new federal employees to what is called a defined benefit retirement plan. So this goes back to the retirement service that we talked about. And this is the gold standard in the private sector. You and I have this. We have a 401k where we can contribute money to it. Our company can match that money. And we are saving up for ourselves for retirement. And so all we're saying is give federal employees the same gold standard that we have in the private sector. Allow them to join that program, contribute part of their money, contribute additional matching money if the agency chooses to do so, to that similar 401k-esque account, and allow them to access the same thing their private sector friends and family get. And that can be their retirement account going forward.
I mean, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. The private sector did this decades ago. And of course, we fight about this a lot in states, right? I mean, I live in the state of Illinois, and we're kind of one of the poster children for runaway pension costs due to way overpromised and overgenerous defined benefit pension systems that just are not affordable. So I think on the federal level, that makes a ton of sense. And, we don't have destitute people who are retiring and, with their 401ks. I think a lot of people are doing fine. Plus people then own it, right? Like you can take it with you. You can do what you want with it. I think there's something that's really important about that.
Yeah, for sure. And David, we're not even saying, hey, employee that's been working for a decade, you're relying on the current way the system is structured. We're not saying move them off of the current structure. We're just saying go forward, allow people to have this new type of retirement account that's the gold standard in the private sector.
Is there any ballpark as to how much we could save taxpayers if we moved in that direction?
So our friends at the Heritage Foundation estimate that this would save $237 billion if we were to move to this type of a retirement benefit for future employees.
Yeah, so that's not even touching the promises that have already been made to current employees.
That's correct. That is correct. So significant savings just by changing what happens going forward.
Yeah, the argument is always, we won't, is occasionally, we won't attract the caliber of employee if we don't offer better benefits and all. If we're doing it prospectively, so from now on, the people coming into the workforce, that's near universal, right? I mean, they're going to get a job at a private company. They're not getting a defined benefit program. So I would think that, there's not a lot of options out there unless you work for state government or local government to get a defined benefit program. And those will probably become more and more scarce only because they're unsustainable. We've just seen we can't afford it. It's a lot of savings. So if we add those to our cuts that we've discussed in previous episodes at other agencies, what would that bring our goal to?
Yeah, David. So that's a pretty substantial progress. Like I said, that's $237 billion. So that brings us up to $1,347 $354.5 billion in savings. So we're getting close to that $2 trillion number every single episode.
Yeah, that ain't nothing. That's great. Bravo to you and your team and all the good folks out there thinking up how we can do this. I'm just so encouraged about the idea of Doge and then what it's actually doing. I mean, we've always known that there's efficiencies and waste, fraud and abuse, but to have some, really smart folks going in and empowered by President Trump to go in there and really look at what's going on. Now we need Congress to take it seriously and, pass laws and lock in a lot of these cuts so that we can actually get on better fiscal footing. So it's super exciting. Jeremiah, if a listener has an idea of some spending cuts or regulations, where can they share those ideas?
Yeah. Well, David, they can go to dogeidea.com. And we want to hear from them because we want to elevate their great ideas alongside these other ideas that have come from my team and from other individuals across the country to members of Congress, to the administration. We want to make sure that the good ideas out there that don't come from ivory towers in Washington, D.C., get to the people that can actually make real change here in Washington.
Yeah, well, kudos to you and the work that your team is doing. It's super important, and I hope that it really results in the kind of cuts that we really think taxpayers deserve. Well, folks, it's still kind of mind-boggling that OPM has records in a limestone mine, or that they would spend $166,000 on individual employees to relocate them. But that's why we're highlighting these stories so that folks can, let their elected representatives know, like we really need Doge and we really need to value taxpayer dollars. Hey, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.